I think that you should know someone well enough so that you know if you can negotiate with them, and so that you have started to formulate a vision of your joint future that you can both look forward to with enthusiasm and confidence. And of course, that's going to depend to some degree on your level of maturity, but that means you've considered such things as, do you have a sufficient number of joint interests, and are you oriented in the same direction with regards to how you're going to handle your joint careers and the possibility of children, and the manner in which you're going to interact with your in-laws. And you have to start considering your life together from the perspective of practicality and economics, I would say. So it can't just be that massive erotic attraction that's associated with love. Although I think that's extraordinarily important, and you're unbelievably fortunate if you have that, and you should do everything you can to maintain it, and that takes effort. That takes real effort and will. But you need to ally that with maturity and intelligence. And the maturity and intelligence is, okay, we're going to put our lives together. What's that going to look like at the level of detail? How are we going to handle our finances? Where are we going to live? What are our joint plans going to be? If you want to set up a household with someone, then there's a lot of things that you need to get straight. And you either do that by bringing your unconscious assumptions to bear on the situation and perhaps clashing where they don't match, or you sit down like a conscious and aware and articulate couple and start to negotiate what your joint responsibilities are going to be. And so that would be, well, who's responsible for the meals and when, and what are you going to eat, and who's going to get groceries, and who's going to pay the bills, and who's going to do which part of what household chores there are to do, and how is that going to be laid out fair. And so you should get to know the person that you're with well enough so that you can start discussing the real practical issues of life and determine whether or not you're capable of negotiating that. Unless you've really made a commitment to someone, like a lifetime commitment, and that's a serious commitment, one that you're not going to back out of. You're not going to take the relationship with the seriousness that's necessary to make it of the highest possible quality and sustainability across the course of your life. And it's really important that it is of that high quality and sustainability, because the relationship, especially when it starts to produce children, is a machine, let's say, a machine that you jointly operate that adds immensely to the quality of your life and the depth of your life. I mean, you have the rope and strand of your life, and your partner has the strands and the rope of his or her life, and then those are tied together to make a stronger rope. And then that unites you across time, and then you undertake massive adventures together. And some of that is the establishment of a household and the establishment of joint careers and the maintenance of each other's mental and physical health and the maintenance of a high quality sexual life and all of that. Very, very challenging to do all of that. And then the joint production and care of children, which, don't be thinking that you can't organize your life when you have children. The thing about modern people is that they're terrified of children. And it's because they regard children as if they're miniature tyrants. And they can be, of course, because anyone will tyrannize over you if you allow them to. Perhaps not anyone, but virtually anyone. Why not regulate your children's behavior? I wrote a chapter in my new book called Don't Let Your Children Do Anything That Makes You Dislike Them. And that's like really serious advice. It's like, if you allow your children to conduct themselves around you in a manner that makes you dislike them, if you're paying attention to the shadow side of yourself that can be aggressive and destructive, then having children is going to mess up your life. But you don't have to do that. You actually have a tremendous amount of control over the quality of your relationship with your children, and also the manner in which you choose to disperse your time. And I mean, don't be afraid of children, man. You're the adult, for God's sake. You've got the upper hand, and if you have a partner you can rely on, well then, you can both decide how it is that you're going to run your household so that you're actually thrilled to death that you have kids and that you have a life. Well, so I have a good marriage, thank God for that, and that's partly due to the outstanding moral quality of my wife, who I'm also extraordinarily attracted to. We've built a life together, and we've had kids together, and we're happy with our kids, and we had plenty of struggle with our kids because one of our children, my daughter, had serious health problems, which she seems to have managed to resolve, partly as a consequence of our own brilliance. But, we've set ourselves up now so that our children are respectable and mature young adults. So thank God for that. And they've got partners who we both really like, and they're going to have children. And well, hooray, that means that this next part of my life is going to be something that I can advance into with a fair bit of hope. The shackled together is more like it's such a, I may have even said that, but it's such a cynical way of looking at it. It's more like what you've produced is an unbreakable bond between two beings, and that makes both of them better in every way if it's a relationship that's based on trust and genuine communication. That's a very difficult thing to attain, because you have to be willing to tell the truth, and the truth is generally a horrible thing. It's easy to tell truth when everyone wants to hear what you have to say, but it's very difficult to tell the truth when no one wants to hear it, least of all yourself. You're not coming clean about old lies, generally, if that will ruin lives. And I don't think you forgive yourself precisely and focus on living truthfully in the future. You focus on living truthfully in the future, and perhaps you don't forgive yourself exactly. That doesn't mean you pound yourself into the ground with guilt. But if you have done things in the past that were reprehensible and that would destroy lives if were brought to light, then you should, I think that generally speaking, you should do everything you can to limit the spread of damage as you attempt to move truthfully into the future. You should get to know someone long enough to know that you too can tell the truth with each other, communicate, and negotiate, because the most important part of a relationship is the fact that you can tell each other the truth and negotiate. People have an unspecified potential for development, educationally, obviously, with regards to the skills they have, but also in relationship to their character. And it's much more encouraging for people, I think, to concentrate on who they could be rather than who they are, especially when they're young, because they still have most of their life ahead of them, and they're not everything they could be yet. And so to tell people even something like, well, you should feel good about yourself the way you are, it's like, well, that there's something there that's seriously lacking, because there's so much more that you could be, that you need to be, and that you should be aiming at. The problem with being okay the way you are is that you don't have a goal then. And people need to have a goal in order to come to terms with their life. Pay attention. Focus on your surroundings, physical and psychological. Notice something that bothers you, that concerns you, that will not let you be, which you could fix, that you would fix. You can find such somethings by asking yourself, as if you genuinely want to know, 3 questions. What is it that is bothering me? Is that something I could fix? And would I actually be willing to fix it? If you find that the answer is no to any or all of the questions, then look elsewhere. Aim lower. Search until you find something that bothers you that you could fix, that you would fix, and then fix it. That might be enough for the day. Maybe there is a stack of paper on your desk, and you have been avoiding it. You won't even really look at it. When you walk into your room, there are terrible things lurking there. Tax forms and bills and letters from people wanting things you aren't sure you can deliver. Notice your fear and have some sympathy for it. Maybe there are snakes in that pile of paper. Maybe you'll get bitten. Maybe there are even hydras lurking there. You'll cut off 1 head and 7 more will grow. How could you possibly cope with that? You could ask yourself, is there anything at all that I might be willing to do about that pile of paper? Would I look maybe at one part of it for 20 minutes? Maybe the answer will be no, but you might look for 10 or even for 5, and if not that, for 1. Start there. You will soon find that the entire pile shrinks in significance merely because you have looked at part of it, and you'll find that the whole thing is made of parts. What if you allowed yourself a glass of wine with dinner, or curled up on the sofa and read, or watched a stupid movie as a reward? What if you instructed your wife or your husband to say good job after you fixed whatever you fixed? Would that motivate you? The people from whom thanks you want might not be very proficient in offering it to begin with, but that shouldn't stop you. People can learn
even if they are very unskilled at the beginning. Ask yourself what you would require to be motivated to undertake the job, honestly, and listen to the answer. Don't tell yourself, I shouldn't need to do that to motivate myself. What do you know about yourself? You are, on the one hand, the most complex thing in the entire universe, and on the other, someone who can't even set the clock on your microwave. Don't overestimate your self-knowledge. Let the tasks for the day announce themselves for your contemplation. Maybe you can do this in the morning as you sit on the edge of your bed. Maybe you can try the night before when you are preparing to sleep. Ask yourself for a voluntary contribution. If you ask nicely and listen carefully and don't try any treachery, you might be offered one. Do this every day for a while, then do it for the rest of your life. Soon you will find yourself in a different situation. Now you will be asking yourself habitually, what could I do that I would do to make life a little better? You are not dictating to yourself what better must be. You are not being a totalitarian or a utopian, even to yourself, because you have learned from your own experience that being a totalitarian is a bad thing. Aim high. Set your sights on the betterment of being. Align yourself in your soul with truth and the highest good. There is habitable order to establish and beauty to bring into existence. There is evil to overcome, suffering to ameliorate, and yourself to better. It is this, in my reading, that is the culminating ethic of the canon of the West. It is this, furthermore, that is communicated by those eternally confusing, glowing stanzas from Christ's Sermon on the Mount, the essence, in some sense, of the wisdom of the New Testament. This is the attempt of the spirit of mankind to transform the understanding of ethics from the initial necessary, thou shalt not of the child and the 10 commandments into the fully articulated positive vision of the true individual. This is the expression not merely of admirable self-control and self-mastery, but of the fundamental desire to set the world right. This is not the cessation of sin, but sin's opposite, good itself. The Sermon on the Mount outlines the true nature of man and the proper aim of mankind. Concentrate on the day so that you can live in the present and attend completely and properly to what is right in front of you. Do that only after you have decided to let what is within shine forth so that it can justify being and illuminate the world. Do that only after you have determined to sacrifice whatever it is that must be sacrificed so that you can pursue the highest good. Realization is dawning. Instead of playing the tyrant, therefore, you are paying attention. You are telling the truth. Instead of manipulating the world, you are negotiating instead of playing the martyr or the tyrant. You no longer have to be envious because you no longer know that someone else truly has it better. You no longer have to be frustrated because you have learned to aim low and to be patient. You are discovering who you are and what you want and what you are willing to do. You are finding that the solutions to your particular problems have to be tailored to you personally and precisely. You are less concerned with the actions of other people because you have plenty to do yourself. Attend to the day, but aim at the highest good. Now, your trajectory is heavenward. That makes you hopeful. Even a man on a sinking ship can be happy when he clambers aboard a lifeboat, and who knows where he might go in the future. To journey happily may well be better than to arrive successfully. Ask and ye shall receive. Knock and the door will open. If you ask as if you want and knock as if you want to enter, you may be offered the chance to improve your life a little, a lot, completely. And with that improvement, some progress will be made in being itself. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today.
If you start with the presumption that there's a baseline of suffering in life and that can be exaggerated as a consequence of human failing, as a consequence of malevolence and betrayal and self-betrayal and deceit and all those things that we do to each other and ourselves that we know that aren't good, that amplifies the suffering. That's sort of the baseline against which you have to work. And it's contemplation of that often that makes people hopeless and depressed and anxious and overwhelmed and all of that. And they have the reasons. But you need something to put up against that. And what you put up against that is meaning. Meaning is actually the instinct that helps you guide yourself through that catastrophe. And most of that meaning is to be found in the adoption of responsibility. So if you think, for example, if you think about the people that you admire, well, you think about when you have a clear conscience first, because that's a good thing to aim at, which is something different than happiness, right?
A clear conscience is different than happiness.
You feel that you've justified your existence, right? And so you're not waking up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat thinking about all the terrible things that you've involved yourself in. The opportunity you lost, or the things that you've let go that you should have capitalized on, and all of that. And so if you think about the times when you're at peace with yourself with regards to how you're conducting yourself in the world, it's almost always conditions under which you've adopted responsibility, right? At least the most guilt I think that you can experience, perhaps, is the sure knowledge that you're not even taking care of yourself, so that you're leaving that responsibility to other people, because that's pretty pathetic. And unless you're psychopathic and you're living a parasitical life, and that characterizes a very small minority of people, and an even smaller minority think that's justifiable. But most of the time you're in guilt and shame because not only are you not taking care of yourself, let's say, so someone else has to, but you're not living up to your full potential. And so there's an existential weight that goes along with that.
Consider your circumstances. Start small. Have you taken full advantage of the opportunities offered to you? Are you working hard on your career or even your job? Or are you letting bitterness and resentment hold you back and drag you down? Have you made peace with your brother? Are you treating your spouse and your children with dignity and respect? Do you have habits that are destroying your health and well-being? Are you truly shouldering your responsibilities? Have you said what you need to say to your friends and family members? Are there things that you could do, that you know you could do, that would make things around you better? Have you cleaned up your life? If the answer is no, here's something to try. Start to stop doing what you know to be wrong. Start stopping today. Don't waste time questioning how you know that what you're doing is wrong, if you are certain that it is. Inopportune questioning can confuse without enlightening, as well as deflecting you from action. You can know that something is wrong or right without knowing why. Your entire being can tell you something that you can neither explain nor articulate. Every person is too complex to know themselves completely, and we all contain wisdom that we cannot comprehend. So simply stop when you apprehend, however dimly, that you should stop. Stop acting in that particular despicable manner. Stop saying those things that make you weak and ashamed. Say only those things that make you strong. Do only those things that you could speak of with honor. You can use your own standards of judgment. You can rely on yourself for guidance. You don't have to adhere to some external arbitrary code of behavior, although you should not overlook the guidelines of your culture. Life is short, and you don't have time to figure everything out on your own. The wisdom of the past was hard earned, and your dead ancestors may have something useful to tell you. Don't blame capitalism, the radical left, or the iniquity of your enemies. Don't reorganize the state until you have ordered your own experience. Have some humility if you cannot bring peace to your household. How dare you try to rule a city? Let your own soul guide you. Watch what happens over the days and weeks. When you are at work, you will begin to say what you really think. You will start to tell your wife, or your husband, or your children, or your parents what you really want and need. When you know that you have left something undone, you will act to correct the omission. Your head will start to clear up as you stop filling it with lies. Your experience will improve as you stop distorting it with inauthentic actions. You will then begin to discover new, more subtle things that you are doing wrong. Stop doing those too. After some months and years of diligent effort, your life will become simpler and less complicated. Your judgment will improve. You will untangle your past. You will become stronger and less bitter. You will move more confidently into the future. You will stop making your life unnecessarily difficult. You will then be left with the inevitable bare tragedies of life, but they will no longer be compounded with bitterness and deceit. Perhaps you will discover that your now less corrupted soul, much stronger than it might otherwise have been, is now able to bear those remaining necessary, minimal, inescapable tragedies. Perhaps you will even learn to encounter them so that they stay tragic. Merely tragic, instead of degenerating into outright hellishness. Maybe your anxiety and hopelessness and resentment and anger, however murderous initially, will recede. Perhaps your uncorrupted soul will then see its existence as a genuine good, as something to celebrate. Even in the face of your own vulnerability, perhaps you will become an ever more powerful force for peace and whatever is good. Perhaps you will then see that if all people did this in their own lives, the world might stop being an evil place. After that, with continued effort, perhaps it could even stop being a tragic place. Who knows what existence might be like if we all decided to strive for the best? Who knows what eternal heavens might be established by our spirits, purified by truth, aiming skyward, right here on the fallen earth. Set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. The self is everything you could be across time. So imagine that there's you and there's the potential inside you, whatever that is, And potential is an interesting idea because it represents something that isn't yet real, yet we act like it's real. Because people will say to you, you should live up to your potential. And that potential is partly what you could be if you interacted with the world in a manner that would gain you the most information. Right? Because you build yourself out of the information in the Piagetian sense. But it's deeper than that too, because we know that if you take yourself and you put yourself in a new environment, new genes turn on in your nervous system. They encode for new proteins. And so you're full of biological potential that won't be realized unless you move yourself around in the world into different challenging circumstances, and that'll turn on different circuits. So it's not merely that you're incorporating information from the outside world in the constructivist sense. It's that by exposing yourself to different environments, you put different physiological demands on yourself all the way down to the genetic level, and that manifests new elements of you. And so one of the things that happens to people, and this is a very common cultural notion, is that you should go on a pilgrimage at some point to somewhere central, and that would be, say, like the Rock in the Pride Rock in the Lion King, because you take yourself out of your dopey little village, and that's just the little bounded you that everyone knows and that isn't very expanded, and then you go somewhere dark and dangerous to the central place, and while you do that, you have adventures, and they toughen you and pull more out of you, like partly because you're becoming informed, which means information. It means you're becoming more organized at every level of analysis, but there's also more of you too.
Everybody has their weak sides, let's say, things they're embarrassed about. When I first started going to the gym, I was like, how old was I? 1985, 23. And I think I weighed 135 pounds and I was 6'1", very, very thin. 27-inch waist, something like that. I smoked like mad and I drank too much. Like I wasn't in good shape. The first attempts forward I took in the gym, I went to this swim exercise class. Jesus, it was me and this like really fat guy, young guy, probably not in any worse shape than me, and like 7 old women over 70, and they could outswim me. Like it was pretty damn humiliating. And so I did a semester of that and got myself in somewhat better shape. And then I started to go to the gym to work out, to lift weights. And that was also rough because I'd be underneath the bloody bench press trying to lift 75 pounds off the rests. And, some muscle-headed bastard would come over and tell me how to do it. And it's like, yeah, thank you. But, it's embarrassing. And lots of times people won't do things like go to the gym because they're so embarrassed about how they look or what sort of shape they're in. And it's a pain to start at the bottom. But you start at the bottom where you're weak. And if you want to rectify what's weak, you have to accept the fact that you're at the bottom and that the first steps are going to be painful. It took me about 3 years, but I stopped smoking and then I stopped drinking and I gained 40 pounds of muscle in like 3.5 years, something like that. I basically had to stop doing that because I had to eat like 6 times a day. It was crazy, but I got a lot more physically confident and a lot more coordinated, because working out with dumbbells makes you coordinated, right? Because it exercises all the small ligaments and the tendons. And so my lower body in particular got a lot more coordinated. Then I could dance. So that was better when I was going out dancing because I did a lot of that in graduate school. But the point of all this is If you're going to rectify your weaknesses, you have to admit your insufficiency to your own shame. Now, if the gap between you and your ideal is so great that it paralyzes you, you shrink that, right?
Set your ambitions, even if you are uncertain about what they should be. The better ambitions have to do with the development of character and ability, rather than status and power. Status, you can lose. You carry character with you wherever you go, and it allows you to prevail against adversity. Knowing this, tie a rope to a boulder. Pick up the great stone, heave it in front of you, and pull yourself towards it. Watch and observe while you move forward. Articulate your experience as clearly and carefully to yourself and others as you possibly can. In this manner, you will learn to proceed more effectively and efficiently towards your goal. And while you are doing this, do not lie, especially to yourself. If you pay attention to what you do and say, you can learn to feel a state of internal division and weakness when you are misbehaving and misspeaking. It's an embodied sensation, not a thought. I experience an internal sensation of sinking and division rather than solidity and strength when I am incautious with my acts and words. It seems to be centered in my solar plexus, where a large knot of nervous tissue resides. I learned to recognize when I was lying, in fact, by noticing this sinking and division, and then inferring the presence of a lie. It often took me a long time to ferret out the deception. Sometimes I was using words for appearance. Sometimes I was trying to disguise my own true ignorance of the topic at hand. Sometimes I was using the words of others to avoid the responsibility of thinking for myself. If you pay attention, when you are seeking something, you will move towards your goal. More importantly, however, you will acquire the information that allows your goal itself to transform. A totalitarian never asks, "What if my current ambition is in error?" He treats it, instead, as the absolute. It becomes his God for all intents and purposes. It constitutes his highest value. It regulates his emotions and motivational states and determines his thoughts. All people serve their ambition. In that matter, there are no atheists. There are only people who know and don't know what God they serve. If you bend everything totally, blindly, and willfully towards the attainment of a goal, and only that goal, you will never be able to discover if another goal would serve you and the world better. It is this that you sacrifice if you do not tell the truth. If instead you tell the truth, your values transform as you progress. If you allow yourself to be informed by the reality manifesting itself as you struggle forward, your notions of what is important will change. You will reorient yourself, sometimes gradually and sometimes suddenly and radically. What happens if, instead, we decide to stop lying? What does this even mean? We are limited in our knowledge after all. We must make decisions here and now, even though the best means and the best goals can never be discerned with certainty. An aim, an ambition, provides the structure necessary for action. An aim provides a destination, a point of contrast against the present, and a framework within which all things can be evaluated. An aim defines progress and makes such progress exciting. An aim reduces anxiety, because if you have no aim, everything can mean anything or nothing, and neither of those two options makes for a tranquil spirit. Thus, we have to think and plan and limit and posit in order to live at all. How then to envision the future and establish our direction without falling prey to the temptation of totalitarian certainty? Some reliance on tradition can help us establish our aims. It is reasonable to do what other people have always done, unless we have a very good reason not to. It is reasonable to become educated and work, and find love, and have a family. That is how culture maintains itself. But it is necessary to aim at your target, however traditional, with your eyes wide open. You have a direction, but it might be ill-formed. You may have been led astray by your own ignorance, and worse, by your own unrevealed corruption. You must make friends, therefore, with what you don't know, instead of what you know. You must remain awake to catch yourself in the act. You must remove the beam in your own eye, before you concern yourself with the mote in your brother's. And in this way, you strengthen your own spirit, so it can tolerate the burden of existence, and you rejuvenate the state. It is our responsibility to see what is before our eyes courageously and to learn from it. even if it seems horrible, even if the horror of seeing it damages our consciousness and half blinds us. The act of seeing is particularly important when it challenges what we know and rely on, upsetting and destabilizing us. It is the act of seeing that informs the individual and updates the state. You are by no means only what you already know. You are also all that which you could know, if you only would. Thus, you should never sacrifice what you could be for what you are. You should never give up the better that resides within for the security you already have, and certainly not when you have already caught a glimpse, an undeniable glimpse, of something beyond. In the Christian tradition, Christ is identified with the Logos. The Logos is the Word of God. That Word transformed chaos into order at the beginning of time. In his human form, Christ sacrificed himself voluntarily to the truth, to the good, to God. In consequence, he died and was reborn. The Word that produces order from chaos sacrifices everything, even itself, to God. That single sentence, wise beyond comprehension, sums up Christianity. Every bit of learning is a little death. Every bit of new information challenges a previous conception, forcing it to dissolve into chaos before it can be reborn as something better. Sometimes, such deaths virtually destroy us. In such cases, we might never recover, or if we do, we change a lot. A good friend of mine discovered that his wife of decades was having an affair. He didn't see it coming. It plunged him into a deep depression. He descended into the underworld. He told me at one point, I always thought that people who were depressed should just shake it off. I didn't have any idea what I was talking about. Eventually, he returned from the depths. In many ways, he's a new man, and perhaps a wiser and better man. He lost 40 pounds. He ran a marathon. He traveled to Africa and climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. He chose rebirth over descent into hell. Imagine, you go to engineering school because that is what your parents desire. But it is not what you want. Working at cross, purposes to your own wishes, you will find yourself unmotivated and failing. You will struggle to concentrate and discipline yourself, but it will not work. Your soul will reject the tyranny of your will. How else could that be said? Why are you complying? You may not want to disappoint your parents, although if you fail, you will do exactly that. You may lack the courage for the conflict necessary to free yourself. You may not want to sacrifice your childish belief in parental omniscience, wishing devoutly to continue believing that there is someone who knows you better than you know yourself, and who also knows all about the world. You want to be shielded in this manner from the stark existential aloneness of individual being and its attendant responsibility. This is all very common and understandable, but you suffer because you are truly not meant to be an engineer. One day you have had enough. You drop out. You disappoint your parents. You learn to live with that. You consult only yourself, even though that means you must rely on your own decisions. You take a philosophy degree. You accept the burden of your own mistakes. You become your own person. By rejecting your father's vision, you develop your own. And then, as your parents age, you've become adult enough to be there for them when they come to need you. They win, too. But both victories had to be purchased at the cost of the conflict engendered by your truth. As Matthew 10:34 has it, citing Christ, emphasizing the role of the spoken truth. Think not that I have come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. As you continue to live in accordance with the truth, as it reveals itself to you, you will have to accept and deal with the conflicts that mode of being will generate. If you do so, you will continue to mature and become more responsible in small ways. Don't underestimate their importance, and enlarge. You will ever more closely approach your newer and more wisely formulated goals and become even wiser in their formulation when you discover and rectify your inevitable errors. Your conception of what is important will become more and more appropriate as you incorporate the wisdom of your experience. You will quit wildly oscillating and walk ever more directly towards the good, a good you could never have comprehended if you had insisted, despite all evidence, that you were right, absolutely right, at the beginning. If existence is good, then the clearest and cleanest and most correct relationship with it is also good. If existence is not good, by contrast, you're lost. Nothing will save you, certainly not the petty rebellions, murky thinking and obscurantist blindness that constitute deceit. Is existence good? You have to take a terrible risk to find out. Live in truth or live in deceit. Face the consequences and draw your conclusions. This is the act of faith whose necessity was insisted upon by the Danish philosopher Kierkegaard. You cannot know ahead of time. Even a good example is insufficient for proof, given the differences between individuals. The success of a good example can always be attributed to luck. Thus, you have to risk your particular individual life to find out. It is this risk that the ancients described as the sacrifice of personal will to the will of God. It is not an act of submission, at least as submission is currently understood. It is an act of courage. It is faith that the wind will blow your ship to a new and better port. It is the faith that being can be corrected by becoming. It is the spirit of exploration itself. Perhaps it is better to conceptualize it this way. Everyone needs a concrete, specific goal, an ambition, and a purpose to limit chaos and make intelligible sense of his or her life. But all such concrete goals can and should be subordinated to what might be considered a meta goal, which is a way of approaching and formulating goals themselves. The meta goal could be live in truth. This means act diligently towards some well-articulated, defined, and temporary end. Make your criteria for failure and success timely and clear, at least for yourself, and even better if others can understand what you are doing and evaluate it with you. While doing so, however, allow the world and your spirit to unfold as they will, while you act out and articulate the truth. This is both pragmatic ambition and the most courageous of faiths.
First thing I would say is, well, you should be afraid of taking risks and pursuing something meaningful. But you should be more afraid of staying where you are if it's making you miserable. It's like the first thing you want to do is dispense with the idea that you get to have any permanent security outside of your ability to contend and adapt. It's the same issue with children. It's like you're paying a price by sitting there being miserable. You might say, well, the devil I know is better than the one I don't. It's like, don't be so sure of that. The clock is ticking.
Yeah,
and if you're miserable in your job now and you change nothing, in 5 years, you'll be much more miserable and you'll be a lot older. It's a luxury to pursue what makes you happy. It's a moral obligation to pursue what you find meaningful. And that doesn't mean it's easy. It might require sacrifice. If you need to change your job too, let's say you have a family and children and a mortgage, you have responsibilities. You've already picked up those responsibilities. You don't just get to walk away scot-free and say, well, I don't like my job, I quit. That's no strategy. But what you might have to do is you think, well, this job is killing my soul. All right, so what do I have to do about that? Well, I have to look for another job. Well, no one wants to hire me. It's like, okay, maybe you need to educate yourself more. Maybe you need to update your curriculum vitae, your resume. Maybe you need to overcome your fear of being interviewed. Maybe you need to sharpen your social skills. Like, you have to think about these things strategically. If you're going to switch careers, you have to do it like an intelligent, responsible person. That might take you a couple of years of effort to do properly. I've dealt with hundreds of people in my clinical and consulting practice, and we set a goal, we develop a vision, and work towards it, and things inevitably get better for people. So it's not a luxury. It's difficult. It's a moral responsibility, and it isn't happiness. It's not, the pursuit isn't for happiness.
You need to know who you are so that you understand your armament and bolster yourself in respect to your limitations. You need to know where you are going so that you can limit the extent of chaos in your life, restructure order, and bring the divine force of hope to bear on the world. You must determine where you are going so that you can bargain for yourself, so that you don't end up resentful, vengeful, and cruel. You have to articulate your own principles so that you can defend yourself against others taking inappropriate advantage of you, and so that you are secure and safe while you work and play. You must discipline yourself carefully. You must keep the promises you make to yourself and reward yourself so that you can trust and motivate yourself. You need to determine how to act toward yourself so that you are most likely to become and to stay a good person. It would be good to make the world a better place. Heaven, after all, will not arrive of its own accord. We will have to work to bring it about and strengthen ourselves so that we can withstand the deadly angels and flaming sword of judgment that God used to bar its entrance. Don't underestimate the power of vision and direction. These are irresistible forces, able to transform what might appear to be unconquerable obstacles into traversable pathways and expanding opportunities. Strengthen the individual. Start with yourself. Take care with yourself. Define who you are. Refine your personality. Choose your destination and articulate your being. As the great 19th century German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche so brilliantly noted, he whose life has a why can bear almost anyhow. You could help direct the world on its careening trajectory, a bit more toward heaven and a bit more away from hell, once having understood hell, researched it, so to speak, particularly your own individual hell. You could decide against going there or creating that. You could aim elsewhere. You could, in fact, devote your life to this. That would give you a meaning with a capital M. That would justify your miserable existence. That would atone for your sinful nature and replace your shame and self-consciousness with the natural pride and forthright confidence of someone who has learned once again to walk with God in the garden. You could begin by treating yourself as if you were someone you were responsible for helping.
If you're hungry and you eat, well, that's good, but it's over, and then you're on to the next thing, right? It's not exactly sustaining, it's just necessary. That's called consummatory reward, by the way. This other reward system is incentive reward, and the incentive reward system works on dopamine, this neurochemical dopamine, which is also the neurochemical tracks that opiates and cocaine and amphetamines, the drugs that people really like to abuse, alcohol often for some people, activate. And so you might say if you don't have enough meaning in your life, then you're more prone to addiction. And that's definitely the case, even with rats. If you take a rat and you put him in a cage by himself and he has nothing to do, and then you give him access to cocaine, he'll get addicted to the point where he won't do anything but take cocaine. But if you throw the rat back in with a bunch of other rats and he gets to do rat things, then it's very hard to get him addicted to cocaine. And so the purposeless rat is prone to addiction. Well, it's the same with human beings. Now, here's a corollary to that, which is really cool. So the magnitude of the reward you experience as you're moving towards a goal is proportionate to the importance of the goal. So that means the more important the goal you pick, the more possibility there is for the kind of reward, let's say, it's really a state of being that is life-affirming. And it is directly life-affirming in that, you know, like if you're in a football game and it's an important football game and maybe you break a finger. And, you know, normally that's a problem. It hurts and you're going to stop doing whatever you're doing. But if you're right in the middle of the game, then you'll be so amped up on this reward system that it's analgesic. It stops the pain. It also suppresses anxiety. So if you have a purpose, then it's analgesic. It takes some of the pain out of life. It's very positive in that it motivates and energizes you and focuses you and makes you able to remember and pay attention. And it quells fear. And so those things are all direct. And so then you might think, well, what's the best possible goal? Well, and that's the purpose, I would say, of religious training and philosophical training. It's like, just what the hell are you doing in the world?
If your life is not going well, perhaps it is your current knowledge that is insufficient, not life itself. Perhaps your value structure needs some serious retooling. Perhaps what you want is blinding you to what else could be. Perhaps you are holding on to your desires in the present so tightly that you cannot see anything else, even what you truly need. Imagine that you are thinking enviously, I should have my boss's job. If your boss sticks to his post stubbornly and competently, thoughts like that will lead you in a state of irritation, unhappiness, and disgust. You might realize this. You think I am unhappy. However, I could be cured of this unhappiness if I could just fulfill my ambition. But then you might think further. Wait, you think, maybe I'm not unhappy because I don't have my boss's job. Maybe I'm unhappy because I can't stop wanting that job. That doesn't mean you can just simply and magically tell yourself to stop wanting that job and then listen and transform. You won't, can't, in fact, just change yourself that easily. You have to dig deeper. You must change what you are after more profoundly. So, you might think, I don't know what to do about this stupid suffering. I can't just abandon my ambitions. That would leave me nowhere to go. But my longing for a job that I can't have isn't working. You might decide to take a different tack. You might ask instead for the revelation of a different plan. One that would fulfill your desires and gratify your ambitions in a real sense, but that would remove from your life the bitterness and resentment with which you are currently affected. You might think, I will make a different plan. I will try to want whatever it is that would make my life better, whatever that might be, and I will start working on it now. If that turns out to mean something other than chasing my boss's job, I will accept that and I will move forward. Now, you're on a whole different kind of trajectory. Before, what was right, desirable, and worthy of pursuit was something narrow and concrete. But you became stuck there, tightly jammed and unhappy. So, you let go. You make the necessary sacrifice and allow a whole new world of possibility hidden from you because of your previous ambition to reveal itself. And there's a lot there. What would your life look like if it were better? What would life itself look like? What does better even mean? You don't know. And it doesn't matter that you don't know exactly right away, because you will start to slowly see what is better. Once you have truly decided to want it, you will start to perceive what remained hidden from you by your presuppositions and preconceptions, by the previous mechanisms of your vision. You will begin to learn. This will only work, however, if you genuinely want your life to improve. You can't fool your implicit perceptual structures. Not even a bit. They aim where you point them, to retool, to take stock, to aim somewhere better. You have to think it through bottom to top. You have to scour your psyche. You have to clean the damn thing up. And you must be cautious, because making your life better means adopting a lot of responsibility. And that takes more effort and care than living stupidly in pain and remaining arrogant, deceitful, and resentful. Let's return to the situation where your aim is being determined by something petty, your aforementioned envy of your boss. Because of that envy, the world you inhabit reveals itself as a place of bitterness, disappointment, and spite. Imagine that you come to notice and contemplate and reconsider your unhappiness. Further, you determine to accept responsibility for it and dare to posit that it might be something at least partly under your control. You crack open one eye for a moment and look. You ask for something better. You sacrifice your pettiness, repent of your envy, and open your heart. Instead of cursing the darkness, you let in a little light. You decide to aim for a better life instead of a better office. But you don't stop there. You realize that it's a mistake to aim for a better life if it comes at the cost of worsening someone else's. So you get creative. You decide to play a more difficult game. You decide that you want a better life in a manner that will also make the life of your family better, or the life of your family and your friends and the strangers who surround them. What about your enemies? Do you want to include them too? You bloody well don't know how to manage that. But you've read some history. You know how enmity compounds. So you start to wish even your enemies well, at least in principle, although you are by no means yet a master of such sentiments. And the direction of your sight changes. You see past the limitations that hemmed you in unknowingly. New possibilities for your life emerge, and you work toward their realization. Your life indeed improves. And then you start to think further, better. Perhaps that means better for me and my family and my friends, even for my enemies. But that's not all it means. It means better today in a manner that makes everything better tomorrow and next week and next year and a decade from now and 1,000 years from now and forever. and then better, means to aim at the improvement of being with a capital I and a capital B. Thinking all of this, realizing all of this. You take a risk. You decide that you will start treating Old Testament God with all his terrible and oft arbitrary seeming power as if he could also be New Testament God, even though you understand the many ways in which that is absurd. In other words, you decide to act as if existence might be justified by its goodness, if only you behaved properly. And it is that decision, that declaration of existential faith, that allows you to overcome nihilism and resentment and arrogance. It is that declaration of faith that keeps hatred of being, with all its attendant evils, at bay. And as for such faith, it is not at all the will to believe things that you know perfectly well to be false. Faith is not the childish belief in magic, that is ignorance or even willful blindness. It is instead the realization that the tragic irrationalities of life must be counterbalanced by an equally irrational commitment to the essential goodness of being. It is simultaneously the will to dare set your sights at the unachievable and to sacrifice everything, including, and most importantly, your life. You realize that you have literally nothing better to do. But how can you do all this, assuming you are foolish enough to try? You might start by not thinking, or more accurately, but less trenchantly, by refusing to subjugate your faith to your current rationality and its narrowness of view. This doesn't mean make yourself stupid. It means the opposite. It means instead that you must quit maneuvering and calculating and conniving and scheming and enforcing and demanding and avoiding and ignoring and punishing. It means you must place your old strategies aside. It means instead that you must pay attention as you may never have paid attention before. The things that you do and that you don't do are far more important than you think. And so if you act that way, of course, the terror of realizing that is that it actually starts to matter what you do. And you might say, well, that's better than living a meaningless existence. It's better for it to matter. But I mean, if you really asked yourself, would you be so sure if you had the choice? I can live with no responsibility whatsoever. The price I pay is that nothing matters. Or I can reverse it and everything matters. But I have to take the responsibility that's associated with that. It's not so obvious to me that people would take the meaningful path. You know, when you say, well, nihilists suffer dreadfully because there's no meaning in their life and they still suffer. Yeah, but the advantage is they have no responsibility. So that's the payoff, and I actually think that's the motivation. Say, well, I can't help being nihilistic. All my belief systems have collapsed. It's like, yeah, maybe. Maybe you've just allowed them to collapse because it's a hell of a lot easier than acting them out. And the price you pay is some meaningless suffering, but you can always whine about that and people will feel sorry for you, and you have the option of taking the pathway of the martyr, so that's a pretty good deal, all things considered, especially when the alternative is to bear your burden properly and to live forthrightly in the world. Well, what Solzhenitsyn figured out, and so many people in the 20th century, it's not just him, even though he's the best example, is that if you live a pathological life, you pathologize your society. And if enough people do that, then it's hell. Really. Really. And you can read the Gulag Archipelago if you have the fortitude to do that, and you'll see exactly what hell is like. And then you can decide if that's a place you'd like to visit, or even more importantly, if it's a place you'd like to visit and take all your family and friends. Because that's what happened in the 20th century. Our eyes are always pointing at things we are interested in approaching or investigating or looking for or having. We must see, but to see, we must aim. So we are always aiming. Our minds are built on the hunting and gathering platforms of our bodies. To hunt is to specify a target, track it, and throw at it. To gather is to specify and to grasp. We fling stones and spears and boomerangs. We toss balls through hoops and hit pucks into nets and curl carved granite rocks down the ice onto horizontal bull's eyes. We launch projectiles at targets with bows, guns, rifles, and rockets. We hurl insults, launch plans, and pitch ideas. We succeed when we score a goal or hit a target. We fail or sin. When we do not, means to miss the mark. We cannot navigate without something to aim at. And while we are in this world, we must always navigate. We are always and simultaneously at point A, which is less desirable than it could be, moving towards point B, which we deem better, in accordance with our explicit and implicit values. We always encounter the world in a state of insufficiency and seek its correction. We can imagine new ways that things could be set right and improved, even if we have everything we thought we needed. Even when satisfied temporarily, we remain curious. We live within a framework that defines the present as eternally lacking and the future as eternally better. If we did not see things this way, we would not act at all. We wouldn't even be able to see, because to see, we must focus. And to focus, we must pick one thing above all else on which to focus. But we can see. We can even see things that aren't there. We can envision new ways that things could be better. We can construct new hypothetical worlds where problems we weren't even aware of can now show themselves and be addressed. The advantages of this are obvious. We can change the world so that the intolerable state of the present can be rectified in the future. The disadvantage to all this foresight and creativity is chronic unease and discomfort, because we always contrast what is with what could be. We have to aim at what could be, but we can aim too high or too low or too chaotically, so we fail and live in disappointment, even when we appear to others to be living well. How can we benefit from our imaginativeness, our ability to improve the future, without continually denigrating our current, insufficiently successful, and worthless lives? The first step, perhaps, is to take stock. Who are you when you buy a house and prepare to live in it? You hire an inspector to list all its faults. As it is in reality, now not as you wish it could be. You'll even pay him for the bad news. You need to know. You need to discover the home's hidden flaws. You need to know whether they are cosmetic imperfections or structural inadequacies. You need to know because you can't fix something if you don't know it's broken. And you're broken. You need an inspector, the internal critic. It could play that role if you could get it on track. If you and it could cooperate. It could help you take stock. But you must walk through your psychological house with it and listen judiciously to what it says. Maybe you're a handyman's dream, a real fixer-upper. How can you start your renovations without being demoralized, even crushed by your internal critic's lengthy and painful report of your inadequacies? Here's a hint. The future is like the past, but there's a crucial difference. The past is fixed, but the future, it could be better. It could be better. Some precise amount, the amount that can be achieved, perhaps in a day, with some minimal engagement. The present is eternally flawed, but where you start might not be as important as the direction you are heading. Perhaps happiness is always to be found in the journey uphill, and not in the fleeting sense of satisfaction awaiting at the next peak. Much of happiness is hope, no matter how deep the underworld in which that hope was conceived. Called upon properly, the internal critic will suggest something to set in order, which you would set in order, voluntarily, without resentment, even with pleasure. Ask yourself, is there one thing that exists in disarray in your life or your situation that you could and would set straight? Could you and would you fix that one thing that announces itself humbly in need of repair? Could you do it now? Imagine that you are someone with whom you must negotiate. Imagine further that you are lazy, touchy, resentful, and hard to get along with. With that attitude, it's not going to be easy to get you moving. You might have to use a little charm and playfulness. Excuse me, you might say to yourself, without irony or sarcasm, I'm trying to reduce some of the unnecessary suffering around here. I could use some help. Keep the derision at bay. I'm wondering if there is anything that you would be willing to do. I'd be very grateful for your service. Ask honestly and with humility. That's no simple matter. You might have to negotiate further, depending on your state of mind. Maybe you don't trust yourself. You think that you'll ask yourself for one thing and having delivered, immediately demand more. And you'll be punitive and hurtful about it. And you'll denigrate what was already offered. Who wants to work for a tyrant like that? Not you. That's why you don't do what you want yourself to do. You're a bad employee, but a worse boss. Maybe you need to say to yourself, okay, I know we haven't gotten along very well in the past. I'm sorry about that. I'm trying to improve. I'll probably make some more mistakes along the way, but I'll try to listen if you object. I'll try to learn. I noticed just now today that you weren't really jumping at the opportunity to help when I asked, is there something I could offer in return for your cooperation? Maybe if you did the dishes, we could go for coffee. You like espresso. How about an espresso? Maybe a double shot. Or is there something else you want? Then you could listen. Maybe you'll hear a voice inside. Maybe it's even the voice of a long-lost child. Maybe it will reply, really, you really want to do something nice for me? You'll really do it. It's not a trick. This is where you must be careful. That little voice, that's the voice of someone once burnt and twice shot. So you could say very carefully, yes, I might not do it very well, and I might not be great company, but I will do something nice for you. I promise. A little careful kindness goes a long way, and judicious reward is a powerful motivator. Then you could take that small bit of yourself by the hand and do the damn dishes. And then you better not go clean the bathroom and forget about the coffee or the movie or the beer, or it will be even harder to call those forgotten parts of yourself forth from the nooks and crannies of the underworld. You might ask yourself, what could I say to someone else? My friend, my brother, my boss, my assistant? That would set things a bit more right between us tomorrow. What bit of chaos might I eradicate at home, on my desk, in my kitchen tonight, so that the stage could be set for a better play? 500 small decisions, 500 tiny actions compose your day today and every day. Could you aim one or two of these at a better result? Better in your own private opinion, by your own individual standards. Could you compare your specific personal tomorrow with your specific personal yesterday? Could you use your own judgment and ask yourself what that better tomorrow might be? Aim small. You don't want to shoulder too much to begin with, given your limited talents, tendency to deceive, burden of resentment, and ability to shirk responsibility. Thus, you set the following goal. By the end of the day, I want things in my life to be a tiny bit better than they were this morning. Then you ask yourself, what could I do that I would do that would accomplish that? And what small thing would I like as a reward? Then you do what you have decided to do, even if you do it badly. Then you give yourself that damn coffee in triumph. Maybe you feel a bit stupid about it, but you do it anyway. And you do the same thing tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day. And with each day, your baseline of comparison gets a little higher. And that's magic. That's compound interest. Do that for 3 years, and your life will be entirely different. Now you're aiming for something higher. Now you're wishing on a star. Now the beam is disappearing from your eye, and you're learning to see. And what you aim at determines what you see. That's worth repeating. What you aim at determines what you see.
If you configure your life so that what you are genuinely doing is aiming at the highest possible good, then the things that you need to survive and to thrive on a day-to-day basis will deliver themselves to you. That's a hypothesis, and it's not some simple hypothesis, right? Because what it basically says is, if you dare to do the most difficult thing that you can conceptualize, your life will work out better than it will if you do anything else. Well, how are you going to find out if that's true? Well, it's a Kierkegaardian leap of faith. There's no way you're going to find out whether or not that's true unless you do it. So no one can tell you either, because just because it works for someone else, I mean, that's
interesting and all that, but it's no proof that it'll work for you. You have to be all in this game. There is no more effective way of operating in the world than to conceptualize the highest good that you can and then strive to attain it. There's no more practical pathway to the kind of success that you could have if you actually knew what success was. The world shifts itself around your aim, because you're a creature that has an aim. You have to have an aim in order to do something. You're an aiming creature. You look at a point and you move towards it. It's built right into you. And so you have an aim. Well, let's say your aim is the highest possible aim. Well, then, so that sets up the world around you. It organizes all of your perceptions. It organizes what you see and you don't see. It organizes your emotions and your motivations. So you organize yourself around that aim. And then what happens is the day manifests itself as a set of challenges and problems. And if you solve them properly, then you stay on the pathway towards that aim. And you can concentrate on the day. And so that way you get to have your cake and eat it too, because you can point into the distance, the far distance, and you can live in the day. And it seems to me that makes every moment of the day supercharged with meaning. That's how, because if everything that you're doing every day is related to the highest possible aim that you can conceptualize, well, that's the very definition of the meaning that would sustain you in your life.
Modern people think the fundamental issue is, do you believe in God? But that's not the fundamental issue. The fundamental issue is, what do you mean by God? And so let me give you an example of this that will make it clearer. So there's a medieval idea that God is the summum bonum, which means the sum of all that's good, or the essence of all that's good. Okay, you might say, well, I don't believe in that. Now remember, this is the definition of God, right? God is the sum of all that's good. Okay, all right, so you don't believe in that. All right, let's take that apart. Do you believe that some things are better than other things? Well, people will say yes. Okay, so then you believe that there is a scale of good. Okay, is there something that all things that are good share in common? And the answer to that has to be yes, because otherwise you don't have a conception of good, right? The word good implies that across good things there's some essence. Okay, well, the definition, one medieval definition of God is the essence of good. Well, okay, let's say you don't believe in that. Okay, does that mean you don't believe in anything that's good? Okay, then how do you act then? Because to act means to do something that's better than what you're doing now, right? There's no action without movement towards the good. And well, you might say, well, I don't believe that there's a unitary good. Okay, you believe there's a fractionated good. Well, then what do you do when those things oppose one another? Right, which would be in a conflict of duty. What do you refer to help you adjudicate between different goods? Well, generally what you do is, if you could pursue A, which is good, or B, which is good, and they conflict, then you pick the higher good. Okay, do you believe in a higher good? Well, if you don't, you can't decide between goods, which means you're paralyzed. If you do believe in the higher good, then do you believe in the highest good? Well, the highest good is God. What do you mean by that? By definition. Okay, so now you have a definition. Now, then the next question might be, well, what's your relationship with the highest good? And you might say, well, I don't have a relationship. It's like, well, actually you do, because you act in relationship to it. You can't help it. One of the interesting things about the biblical corpus is that it's based on the insistence that you have a relationship with being and becoming, a relationship, like a personal relationship.
The biblical narrative of paradise and the fall provides a profound account of the nature of being and points the way to a mode of conceptualization and action well matched to that nature. In the Garden of Eden, prior to the dawn of self-consciousness, so goes the story. Human beings were sinless. Our primordial parents, Adam and Eve, walked with God. Then, tempted by the snake, the first couple ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, discovered death and vulnerability, and turned away from God. Mankind was exiled from paradise and began its effortful mortal existence. The idea of sacrifice enters soon afterward, beginning with the account of Cain and Abel and developing through the Abrahamic adventures and the Exodus. After much contemplation, struggling humanity learns that God's favor could be gained and his wrath averted through proper sacrifice. And also, that bloody murder might be motivated among those unwilling or unable to succeed in this manner. When engaging in sacrifice, our forefathers began to act out what would be considered a proposition, if it were stated in words, that something better might be attained in the future by giving up something of value in the present. The necessity for work is one of the curses placed by God upon Adam and his descendants in consequence of original sin. Adam's waking to the fundamental constraints of his being, his vulnerability, his eventual death, is equivalent to his discovery of the future. The future. That's where you go to die. Hopefully not too soon. Your demise might be staved off through work, through the sacrifice of the now to gain benefit later. It is for this reason, among others, no doubt, that the concept of sacrifice is introduced in the biblical chapter immediately following the drama of the fall. There is little difference between sacrifice and work. They are also both uniquely human. Sometimes animals act as if they are working, but they are really only following the dictates of their nature. Beavers build dams. They do so because they are beavers, and beavers build dams. They don't think, yeah, but I'd rather be on a beach in Mexico with my girlfriend while they're doing it. Prosaically, such sacrifice, work, is delay of gratification, but that's a very mundane phrase to describe something of such profound significance. The discovery that gratification could be delayed was simultaneously the discovery of time and, with it, causality, at least the causal force of voluntary human action. Long ago, in the dim mists of time, we began to realize that reality was structured as if it could be bargained with. We learned that behaving properly now, in the present, regulating our impulses, considering the plight of others, could bring rewards in the future, in a time and place that did not yet exist. We began to inhibit, control, and organize our immediate impulses so that we could stop interfering with other people and our future selves. Doing so was indistinguishable from organizing society. The discovery of the causal relationship between our efforts today and the quality of tomorrow motivated the social contract, the organization that enables today's work to be stored, reliably, mostly in the form of promises from others. Understanding is often acted out before it can be articulated, just as a child acts out what it means to be mother or father before being able to give a spoken account of what those roles mean. The act of making a ritual sacrifice to God was an early and sophisticated enactment of the idea of the usefulness of delay. There is a long conceptual journey between merely feasting hungrily and learning to set aside some extra meat, smoked by the fire, for the end of the day, or for someone who isn't present. It takes a long time to learn to keep anything later for yourself, or to share it with someone else. And those are very much the same thing as, in the former case, you are sharing with your future self. It is much easier and far more likely to selfishly and immediately wolf down everything in sight. There are similar long journeys between every leap in sophistication with regard to delay and its conceptualization. Short-term sharing, storing away for the future, representation of that storage in the form of records, and later in the form of currency, and ultimately the saving of money in a bank or other social institution. Some conceptualizations had to serve as intermediaries, or the full range of our practices and ideas surrounding sacrifice and work, and their representation could have never emerged. Our ancestors acted out a drama, a fiction. They personified the force that governs fate as a spirit that can be bargained with, traded with as if it were another human being. And the amazing thing is that it worked. This was in part because the future is largely composed of other human beings, often precisely those who have watched and evaluated and appraised the tiniest details of your past behavior. It's not very far from that to God, sitting above on high, tracking your every move and writing it down for further reference in a big book. Here's a productive symbolic idea. The future is a judgmental father. That's a good start. But two additional archetypal foundational questions arose because of the discovery of sacrifice, of work. Both have to do with the ultimate extension of the logic of work, which is sacrifice now to gain later. First question. What must be sacrificed? Small sacrifices may be sufficient to solve small, singular problems. But it is possible that larger, more comprehensive sacrifices might solve an array of large and complex problems all at the same time. That's harder, but it might be better. Adapting to the necessary discipline of medical school will, for example, fatally interfere with the licentious lifestyle of a hardcore undergraduate party animal. Giving that up is a sacrifice. But a physician can, to paraphrase George W., really put food on his family. That's a lot of trouble dispensed with over a very long period of time. So sacrifices are necessary to improve the future, and larger sacrifices can be better. Second question, set of related questions really. We've already established the basic principle, sacrifice will improve the future. But a principle, once established, has to be fleshed out. Its full extension or significance has to be understood. What is implied by the idea that sacrifice will improve the future, in the most extreme and final of cases? Where does that basic principle find its limits? We must ask, to begin, what would be the largest, most effective, most pleasing of all possible sacrifices? And then how good might the best possible future be if the most effective sacrifice could be made? The God of Western tradition, like so many gods, requires sacrifice. But sometimes he goes even further. He demands not only sacrifice, but the sacrifice of precisely what is loved best. This is most starkly portrayed and most confusingly evident in the story of Abraham and Isaac. Abraham, beloved of God, long wanted a son, and God promised him exactly that, after many delays, and under the apparently impossible conditions of old age and a long barren wife. But not so long afterward, when the miraculously born Isaac is still a child, God turns around and in unreasonable and apparently barbaric fashion demands that his faithful servant offer his son as a sacrifice. The story ends happily. God sends an angel to stay Abraham's obedient hand and accepts a ram in Isaac's stead. That's a good thing, but it doesn't really address the issue at hand. Why is God's going further necessary? Why does life impose such demands? We'll start our analysis with a truism, stark, self-evident, and understated. Sometimes things do not go well. That seems to have much to do with the terrible nature of the world, with its plagues and famines and tyrannies and betrayals. But here's the rub. Sometimes when things are not going well, it's not the world that's the cause. The cause is instead that which is currently most valued subjectively and personally. Why? Because the world is revealed to an indeterminate degree through the template of your values. If the world you are seeing is not the world you want, therefore, it's time to examine your values. It's time to rid yourself of your current presuppositions. It's time to let go. It might even be time to sacrifice what you love best so that you can become who you might become instead of staying who you are.
The more radical the necessary change, the more pain that accompanies it. Like the more opportunity as well. And a lot of what we learn painfully. And so it's not surprising that people shrink away from learning. We learn in pain and anxiety very frequently. Everyone knows that. Like the things that you really learned in life, it's like, it was no joy, man. Like it took you out. And so the fact that people flee from that is hardly surprising. But it doesn't help. That's the thing. It just stores up the catastrophe for later. And so the better idea is to eat a little poison every day so that you don't have to overdose in a month. It's something like that. And it is the case that I think because you aren't forced to, first of all, you don't learn unless you're forced to learn. I know there's alternatives to that. There's the voluntary search for knowledge. And that's a fine thing. And that is an antidote to this. But apart from that, speaking more practically, you tend not to learn unless you're forced to learn. And what you tend to learn by force are difficult lessons. And so people are very prone to not seek that out. It's not surprising. But it's because they don't understand the consequences very well. You know, it's because they're convinced that there's some way of forestalling the necessary learning. And there isn't any way of forestalling it. All you do is make it worse in the future. You make yourself smaller and you make the lesson harder. And so that's why in so many religious doctrines, there's emphasis on humility. And humility isn't to debase yourself. It's to understand that you don't know enough so that your life isn't going to be miserable. And so every chance you get to grab something new that will help you along your way, you should take it as fast as you can. But you have to have a very tragic, I would say, view of reality, and also a harsh one, because it's not just tragedy, it's also malevolence. You have to understand that those are waiting for you. And that makes you desperate enough to learn. And that might make you desperate enough to fall out of your ideology. But that's a hard way of looking at the world. It beats living through it, though.
Aim up. Pay attention. Fix what you can fix. Don't be arrogant in your knowledge. Strive for humility, because totalitarian pride manifests itself in intolerance, oppression, torture, and death. Become aware of your own insufficiency, your cowardice, malevolence, resentment, and hatred. Consider the murderousness of your own spirit before you dare accuse others, and before you attempt to repair the fabric of the world. Maybe it's not the world that's at fault. Maybe it's you. You've failed to make the mark. You've missed the target. You've fallen short of the glory of God. You've sinned. And all of that is your contribution to the insufficiency and evil of the world. And above all, don't lie. Don't lie about anything ever. Lying leads to hell. It was the great and the small lies of the Nazi and communist states that produced the deaths of millions of people. Consider then that the alleviation of unnecessary pain and suffering is a good. Make that an axiom. To the best of my ability, I will act in a manner that leads to the alleviation of unnecessary pain and suffering. You have now placed at the pinnacle of your moral hierarchy a set of presuppositions and actions aimed at the betterment of being. Why? Because we know the alternative. The alternative was the 20th century. The alternative was so close to hell that the difference is not worth discussing. And the opposite of hell is heaven. To place the alleviation of unnecessary pain and suffering at the pinnacle of your hierarchy of value is to work to bring about the kingdom of God on earth. That's a state, and a state of mind at the same time.